Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about my week number 10 waiver wire ads for fantasy football in 2021. Inside today's video, I'm going to be going in depth into some running backs, wide receivers, as well as tight ends that I believe you guys should be picking up off of the waiver wire prior to week number 10. But before we can get on into things, I would like to ask, if you are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. Not only is it free, I put out content every single day to help you guys win your 2021 fantasy football championship. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure to hit that like button down below to help boost this video up the algorithm so that more beautiful people like yourself can see today's video. I'd also like to ask, if you guys are on Twitter and would like to follow me on there, to please do so at NotoriousFNTSY. So without further ado, let's get into my week number 10 waiver wire ads. We begin with the running back position, headlined by Devonta Freeman, running back of the Baltimore Ravens, going up against the Miami Dolphins in Miami on Thursday Night Football. Now, earlier on in the season, this Baltimore Ravens backfield was impossible to dissect. One game, we'd see one running back be the lead back, and then just a week later, it would be another running back, and it was just very, very confusing. But over the last 3 weeks, we have very clearly seen that Devonta Freeman is the #1 running back in this committee system in Baltimore, and with Latavius Murray's health up in the air, I am very certain that this week, going up against the Miami Dolphins, that Devonta Freeman will be the lead back on the team. Last week, going up against the Minnesota Vikings in a disaster of a game for the Vikings were laying a smackdown, WWE style, on the Baltimore Ravens, and somehow managed, in typical Minnesota Vikings fashion, to choke the game. In that game, Devonta Freeman had 13 rushes for 79 yards, as well as having 2 receptions on 3 targets for 4 yards, as well as a touchdown. As we all know, the Miami Dolphins defense is soft as baby shit up against the run. I would not be surprised at all if Devonta Freeman was able to put up a top 12 performance on the week. Now, am I going to project him to be a top 12 running back? Of course not, because that's a little bit crazy, but it is definitely possible going up against a not so hot Miami Dolphins run defense. I understand that they look pretty solid last week up against the Houston Texans, but there's a big difference when going up against the Houston Texans compared to going up against the fucking Baltimore Ravens. So I expect Devonta Freeman to have a very solid showing in this game. Next running back to discuss is Jordan Howard, running back of the Philadelphia Eagles, going up against the Denver Broncos in Mile High in Denver. Running back snap counts last week for the Philadelphia Eagles up against the LA Chargers go as follows. 44% of the snaps went to Boston Scott at the running back position, 40% was Jordan Howard, and 19% was Kenneth Gainwell. Boston Scott didn't have all that good of a game. Jordan Howard dominated, and Kenneth Gainwell was just kind of out there getting the ball a little bit more than he did in week number 8 when everyone was looking for Kenneth Gainwell to have a great game. He disappeared, played a little bit better last week, but again, nothing special. So like I said, Jordan Howard basically dominated this backfield. In week number 9 up against the LA Chargers, he had 17 rushes for 71 yards as well as a touchdown. That is 2 weeks in a row now with at least 1 touchdown. The week prior, in week number 8, he scored 2 touchdowns. So he has 3 touchdowns in the last 2 games. And I understand that this backfield is pretty confusing. The snap count is pretty confusing. But at the end of the day, at this point, based upon what we've seen in the last 2 games without Miles Sanders, Jordan Howard needs to be rostered, and Jordan Howard potentially this week up against the Denver Broncos needs to be played. Now, I understand last week the Denver Broncos defense suffocated Dak Prescott and that Dallas Cowboys offense. Zeke wasn't able to do much when he was healthy in the game, and then Tony Pollard didn't do too much either. But at the end of the day, I do think that Jordan Howard could have a solid showing this week based upon the amount of volume that he sees, especially on the goal line. That's where Jordan Howard makes the money. That's where Jordan Howard gets you those fantasy points. When he's knocking on the door, when the team's knocking on the door, it doesn't matter if Boston Scott got him there. It doesn't matter if Kenneth Gainwell got them there. All that matters is that when they're there, it's Jordan Howard time, and I expect Jordan Howard to have a pretty solid showing here this week up against the Denver Broncos. Next up, we pivot to Brandon Bolden, running back of the New England Patriots, going up against the Cleveland Browns. Now, Damian Harris last week, as well as Ramondre Stevenson, were hurt in that game up against the Carolina Panthers. So this kind of pickup of Brandon Bolden severely hinges on the fact that neither of them are back this week, because I think if Damien Harris is back and Ramondre Stevenson, that Brandon Bolden's value is kind of screwed over a little bit. So if neither return, that's where I really like Brandon Bolden. Hopefully tomorrow we'll have a lot more clarity on that situation. Last week, up against the Carolina Panthers, he had 8 carries for 54 yards, as well as having 2 receptions on 2 targets for 27 yards, as well as a fumble in that game. I was personally very shocked when watching the game and looking at the stats at the end of the game that Brandon Bolden only had 2 receptions, as well as only having 2 targets, because typically Brandon Bolden is a huge benefactor from the receiving game. He's going to be seeing a decent amount of targets, maybe 5+ targets, game in and game out, and that was nowhere to be found up against the Carolina Panthers. I feel like this week up against the Cleveland Browns, we're going to be seeing a lot more of Brandon Bolden in the receiving game. You also kind of have to account for the fact that Bill Belichick is just a crazy person. That Bill Belichick might, even if Ramondre Stevenson is healthy next week, and maybe so is Damien Harris, that he just healthy scratches Ramondre Stevenson, because Stevenson has looked nothing but great this season. This guy has looked amazing every single time he's touched the field, especially in preseason as well. But it doesn't seem to matter, because even when he plays well, Bill Belichick will reward him by just making him a healthy scratch next week. So again, is that 100% going to happen? No. But I still do believe even if Harris and Stevenson return, that Bolden has some value, but that value will be much higher, obviously, without either of them in the game up against the Cleveland Browns. Next up, we move to Eno Benjamin, running back of the Arizona Cardinals, going up against the Carolina Panthers this week. So Chase Edmonds has been sent to the short-term IR with a high ankle sprain, and that is going to elevate James Conner to be the running back 1 on the team. James Conner absolutely wiped the fucking floor with the San Francisco 49ers last week like he was a janitor. He absolutely eviscerated that defense. He scored 1, 2, 3 total fucking touchdowns in that game. James Conner looked amazing. So what role does that leave for Eno Benjamin? Now, Eno Benjamin's not going to be able to surpass James Conner because of how good James Conner's looked this season, but he will still be seeing some touches on the team, and maybe we do see in this game up against the Carolina Panthers that he does have a strong role as the number 2 running back on the team. Because we have seen this season, even when Chase Edmonds is healthy, that there's still a healthy dosage of James Conner in the offense. So maybe with James Conner as the number 1 guy, we will see some Eno Benjamin, which could make him viable in deeper leagues. Last week up against the 49ers, after Chase Edmonds exits the game, we saw Eno Benjamin have 9 rushes for 39 yards, as well as scoring a touchdown in that game. So don't be surprised if we see a little bit of Eno Benjamin this week, making him somewhat fantasy viable. Again, if you're in like a fucking 10, 8-team league, you're not going to add Eno Benjamin, but in a 12-team league with a deep bench, a 14-team league, I do believe that Eno Benjamin is a guy that needs to be rostered. Final running back to discuss here before we pivot onto the wide receivers and the tight ends is Jeff Wilson Jr., running back of the San Francisco 49ers, going up against the LA Rams. Now, a lot of people got very nervous. Knees weak, arms are heavy, mom's fucking spaghetti is ready, Eminem style, about Elijah Mitchell last week because, ooh, spooky, Jeff Wilson's back, and people got really nervous. Now, was I really nervous? No, but I did get a little bit sweaty because I do know that Kyle Shanahan is the kind of guy that doesn't care at all how you've played previously this season. Elijah Mitchell has been the workhorse, but in Shanahan's mind, he doesn't care because he'll just randomly insert Kyle Juszczyk into the game, or randomly JaMychal Hasty will steal a touchdown. So I was thinking, oh man, maybe Jeff Wilson will at least see some work to make me want to pivot off of maybe Elijah Mitchell if I have other options available on my team. And even despite the 49ers getting pounded by the Arizona Cardinals, especially by their rushing attack, we saw Elijah Mitchell have a great game, and in that game, Jeff Wilson did not see a single snap. Jeff Wilson didn't even see the field at all. So Elijah Mitchell is still the clear workhorse back, the clear lead back of the 49ers. But I do believe that in a deep league scenario, Jeff Wilson is rosterable, and maybe over the next couple of weeks, we see an increased workload for Jeff Wilson, especially since Kyle Shanahan just does things like that. So before we get on in to talking about the wide receivers, I would like to ask if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, to please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. While you're down there, make sure to leave a like on today's video as well. It helps me out a ton. So now let's go ahead and pivot into the wide receivers, headlined by Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver of the Cleveland Browns, going up against the New England Patriots in New England. Nick, why does it say Donovan Jones on the graphic? His name's Donovan Peoples-Jones. It's because it wouldn't fit, and I think the graphic looks better like that. So his name is Donovan Peoples-Jones. Donovan Peoples-Jones, with Odell gone. Everyone last week, including myself, was banging the drum, fucking clamoring for Jarvis Landry. It's Jarvis Landry season, baby. Odell's gone. Let's go. And everyone was so pumped up. I was pumped up as well. But guess what? It just wasn't. Jarvis was a disaster for fantasy football. He was a huge disappointment. But you want to know who wasn't a disappointment? Donovan Peoples-Jones. In that game up against the Cincinnati Bengals, he had 2 receptions on 3 targets for 86 yards, as well as a touchdown. The last game he played on the season, he was also pretty productive. So he's had 2 weeks in a row of having solid games. This week going up against the New England Patriots isn't necessarily a wet dream matchup. The Patriots defense is very solid, but the Cleveland Browns just ran an absolute train on the Cincinnati Bengals. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if we saw Donovan Peoples-Jones mosey his way on in to the end zone this week. He's certainly a startable wide receiver, but he will probably not be getting it done on the season strictly based upon volume. He's not a guy that I expect to see 8, 9, 10 targets any given game now with Odell gone. But I still do believe he has value with some very big play upside this week up against the Patriots, as well as going forward. Next up, we move to Elijah Moore, a wide receiver of the New York Jumbo Jets, going up against the Buffalo Bills. Over the last 3 weeks, Elijah Mitchell has seen over 6 targets a game. Last week was his breakout game, the breakout game of his career since he's a rookie, obviously. That's going to be his career game going up against the Indianapolis Colts in prime time. Even with Mike White getting hurt, even with Josh Johnson being in at the starting quarterback in that game, we saw him play very well. In that game, Moore had 7 receptions on 8 targets for 84 yards, as well as having not 1, but 2 touchdowns in that game. Even though, like I said, Mike White was knocked out of that game, it does appear, at least based upon head coach Saleh, that he is saying that Mike White is going to be the starter this week, not Zach Wilson. Eventually, we will see Zach Wilson put back in as the starting quarterback of the team, but right now, with Mike White under center, I do feel very confident about Elijah Moore, as well as going forward. Now, I understand it's a tough pill to swallow that, holy shit, I have to start a guy that's on the Jets, right? It's a tough pill to swallow when you start Michael Carter. It's going to be a tough pill to swallow when you start Elijah Moore going forward. This week up against the Buffalo Bills, I'm not overly ecstatic to play him, but I do very much believe that he is worthy of a pickup this week. So moving forward, we got Van Jefferson, wide receiver of the LA Rams, going up against the San Francisco 49ers this week in San Francisco. While having the wide receiver number 3 on any team in the NFL is never too promising, but on a high-octane offense, a high-scoring offense like the LA Rams, I believe that Van Jefferson is useful. Now, I understand some people will be like, but Nick, didn't you watch the game last week, last night, you fucking idiot? Didn't you see that the Titans just bent the LA Rams offense over? I agree. The LA Rams offense got skull-fucked by the Tennessee Titans defense. I understand, but I still believe that the Rams have one of the best offenses in the NFL. I think Matthew Stafford had his classic Detroit Lions moment as he does like a 360 like he's in Modern Warfare 2 and just throws the ball right at the enemy. It was stupid. It is what it is, but at the end of the day, I think Matthew Stafford and the Rams are going to be just fine, and I think that Van Jefferson is a option that I would definitely be looking to start in deeper leagues and is a guy that I'm even fine picking up in a 12-team league, especially in plus matchups. And this week up against the 49ers, that may be a plus matchup as Colt McCoy fucking carved him up like a pumpkin, carved him up like Thanksgiving turkey last week. So in that game up against the Tennessee Titans, despite them having a bad game, he kind of had a down game as well. 3 receptions on 7 targets for 41 yards. But 7 targets to me is still promising. I'm still excited to get a guy on this team that's going to be getting 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 plus targets some games. So I think that Van Jefferson is definitely worthy of a pickup as he's my number 3 waiver wire wide receiver on the week. Next up, we move to Deshaun Jackson, wide receiver of the turn your volume down, the Las Vegas Raiders, going up against the Kansas City Chiefs this week. Deshaun Jackson was far from excellent in LA with the Rams, but that's okay, because he didn't have a strong role. How can you have a strong role if fucking Cooper Kupp is just tearing the league apart? Cooper Kupp, if you guys have ever seen The Dictator and you've seen his jacket where he has all of those medals on it, that's basically Cooper Kupp. He has all of the accolades on the season. Cooper Kupp's having a great year. Robert Woods is catching fire, right? Like the Hunger Games book. So I just really think there wasn't much wiggle room really for Deshaun Jackson to have a great season, because we also saw the emergence of the guy we just talked about, Van Jefferson. His best game on the Rams dates back all the way to week number 3 up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, having 3 receptions on 5 targets for 120 yards as well as a touchdown. But now he's on the Raiders. So we could see that big play upside return for him on the Raiders team without Henry Ruggs. Again, Do not drink and drive. Don't do that. Henry Ruggs is now gone, obviously. So they have Renfro. And who else outside that, right? We have Bryan Edwards. Swing and a fucking miss. I'm talking about last week. That was a swing and a miss. And the ball was already in the catcher's mitt by the time I swung. I thought maybe Bryan Edwards, we could squeeze out like an orange. Just a teensy bit. Just a little bit of upside. And it was gone. So I think it's entirely possible that Deshaun Jackson elevates himself into a solid scenario here in Las Vegas. It's not 100% that this guy is going to be in a great scenario, but I think Derek Carr should be able to find him deep down the field. So I think Deshaun Jackson is certainly worthy of an ad. Next up, we got our final wide receiver, Russell Gage, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons, going up against the Dallas Cowboys this week in Jerry's World. After everyone picks up Russell Gage in week number 8, right? I'm banging the drum. Calvin Ridley's going to be gone for some time. Russell Gage is the wide receiver 2. It's going to be great for Russell Gage. He's now the wide receiver 1. Let's fucking do it, baby. I'm ready. I'm fired up to play Russell Gage. And then the man puts up a goose egg, a bagel, 0 points, whatever you want to call it when a guy scores 0 points. He put up a goose egg. He did nothing up against the Carolina Panthers. And then, out of nowhere, like an RKO from Randy Orton, this man has 7 receptions on 8 targets for 65 yards last week up against the Saints. Just out of nowhere. Goes from 0 involvement at all with the Panthers, up against the Panthers, to very involved against the Saints. Does that make any sense to you? No, it doesn't. But Ridley was put on the reserve list, meaning he's going to be out for at least another 2 games after this because he was on the reserve list for the game last week. So Russell Gage may have value for just the next 2 weeks, or maybe has value for the rest of the season because, again, it's not like Calvin Ridley is injured and we have some type of a timetable for return. It's personal with Calvin Ridley, and I hope Calvin Ridley is okay. So if Calvin Ridley comes back in 2 weeks, I wouldn't be surprised. But if Calvin Ridley doesn't come back at all, I also wouldn't be surprised since it's not an injury-related issue. So I hope that Mr. Calvin Ridley is okay. But Russell Gage right now, his value is at its peak without Calvin Ridley. Final position to discuss here is the tight ends, headlined by Logan Thomas, tight end of the Washington football team, going up against the Tampa Bay Bucks this week at home in Washington. It appears that this is going to be the return game for Mr. Logan Thomas, unless anything goes wrong in practice, obviously. It seems as though he's going to get the nod to play in this game. We have seen Ricky Seals-Jones perform quite well as of recently. He's not like a guy that I expect to be a top 5 tight end, but it is pretty clear, at least in my opinion, that when Ricky Seals-Jones was out there, they were utilizing him just like they're going to utilize Logan Thomas when he comes back from this injury. In his last game that he wasn't hurt in was in week number 3 up against the Bills, because in week number 4, I believe in the game up against the Falcons, that was the game he ended up getting hurt, so he had 0 points in it. It was a injury very early on in the game. So in that game up against the Bills in week 3, he went 4 for 4, 4 receptions on 4 targets, 4 for 4 like he's at Wendy's for 42 yards and a tug. Going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers is far from a wet dream matchup, but I do believe that Logan Thomas could have a solid showing in that game. And final tight end to discuss, final player to discuss in today's video is my main man, Dan Arnold. Get to the chopper. My Arnold Schwarzenegger impression isn't the greatest, but it is what it is. I like doing it every time. So Dan Arnold going up against the Indianapolis Colts this week. Since week number 5, the Jacksonville Jaguars have really committed to using Dan Arnold as one of the key points in that offense ever since week 5 up against the Tennessee Titans. Last week up against the Buffalo Bills in their winning effort. Now, this wasn't an ass kicking of the Bills. The game was 6-9. Nice. So the Jaguars do come out with a W. Eat that W. Jameis Winston style. In that game, he had 4 receptions on 7 targets for 60 yards. So he's a guy that's being heavily targeted every single game, and there's a lot worse options on the waiver wire than Dan Arnold. And maybe he could get it up against the Indianapolis Colts, because the Colts defense hasn't looked chef's kiss menu week. Didn't look that great up against Josh Johnson last week, so I wouldn't be surprised if Dan Arnold had a great game this week. So go ahead and pick up Logan Thomas as well as Dan Arnold. If you guys have any questions at all, right, you're thinking, you know what, some of these players aren't available on the waiver wire, then ask down below. I love chatting about any of the players that are available that you are looking to pick up on the week. In some leagues, if you're in a smaller league, like an 8-team league, there may be much better players available. If you're in a 16-team league, some of these guys won't be available, and you might have other questions. So let me know down below. I love you guys all so much. I hope you guys enjoy Monday Night Football tonight. Thank you guys all so much for watching. And as always, guys, have a great rest of your guys' day. Goodbye.